Farmers in Rwanda's Nyagatare district have a clever way to describe when they're being ripped off by opportunistic middlemen.
What they call it's like burning their crops. Burning crops.
The phrase comes up whenever cash-strapped farmers are forced to sell their crops while they're still in the field. Often they get no more than half their true value, enough to either feed themselves or buy seed and fertilizer for the next crop, but not for both. Lately, though, farmers are learning how to turn a profit rather than just a phrase. What's changed? They've begun working with NIAMIG, that's the Nyagatare Maize Investment Group. NIAMIG is an offshoot of the UK project called Maize Innovation Platform. For the past 5 years, the platform has helped farmers boost productivity through training and improved seeds and fertilizers. That boosts yields, but it doesn't necessarily boost profits, and that's where NIAMIG comes in. NIAMIG helps farmers find better markets for their maize. It also demands that its farmers follow strict quality standards needed to sell to the World Food Program, the Ministry of Agriculture, and other eagerly sought contracts. Key to NIAMIG's success has been a warrantage system it developed with microfinancer Dutemberry. Under their warrantage system, farmers are loaned the current market value for 60% of their crop at harvest time. NIAMIG warehouses the harvest and sells it after the price tops out 2 or 3 months later. Dutemberry and NIAMIG do profit, but because of their drive and financial acumen, so too do Nyagatare maize farmers.
Flying through the darkness with trouble on.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, the editor of This is Africa, Lanre Akinola, his co-moderator, Heather Grady, and her panel.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last session of the day. We've successfully cleared the first hurdle. Everyone is up on stage. This is quite a unique panel for a number of reasons. One, as you can tell, it's a fairly sizable panel. But I would also say that it's the most important panel of the day because we have on stage the people, the individuals, a cross-section of the individuals who are really at the heart of everything we've been talking about today. One thing that strikes me about Africa and any debate about Africa and its potential and how it will and can realize its potential is that invariably it boils down to one issue, and it's the same issue every single time, and that's the role of government. There's so many things that have to come together, we all know that. The private sector, the role of the private sector, versus the public sector, the role of science, the role of innovation, the role of the youth, job creation, and so on and so forth. All of these things have to come together, but all of them always boil down to one thing, which is, what is the government doing? Is it creating the right environment for this potential to be realized? And we have a very unique opportunity here to speak to the people, and this is no exaggeration, the people on whose shoulders a lot of this rests. So I'd like to turn to my panel and just sort of hammer home the point, in case your jobs aren't stressful enough as they are, a lot of what we've been talking about comes down to you and the decisions you make in the coming years. And I'd like that to really be the overarching theme of this discussion. The topic is getting it done. How can we pull together to catalyze innovation or to drive innovation? But I'd like to stop at just getting it done, because that is the key question. We can recite statistics endlessly. We can recite the issues that are, the pros and cons of the African growth story and so on and so forth. We all know it comes down to one thing, and that is making good decisions. And making good decisions when it comes to policy. And in agriculture is no exception. And doubly so, because in agriculture, we have this dynamic where access to finance is one of the key constraints to realizing all of this potential. And what we have is a phenomenal panel of finance and agriculture ministers who represent the two sides of that equation. And what I'd like to focus on for this session is to really drill down into the practicalities of this, of what is the day-to-day reality of the decisions that have to be made, and that relationship between the finance side and the agriculture side. Before we go into the actual discussion, let me just very quickly run through the panel. I'll keep the introductions very brief, and then we will start to get into the discussion. Two things I would like to say to the panel before we begin. This is as much a conversation as it is a panel discussion. This is a dialogue. This is not just about a back and forth and a reciting of the issues we all know. This is about talking about your experience and being frank and being honest about what that experience is and what that relationship is like on a day-to-day basis. Of course, we all sort of agree in fundamental terms that we need to work together, but it's not always that easy. And managing that relationship can be tricky at times. Now, I'm going to run through this. You have to bear with me because there are a lot of names to remember here, and I don't want to get any of them wrong. But I'm going to start with someone we've already heard from today, and who doesn't really need much of an introduction, but we're joined once again by the Honorable Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is the Coordinating Minister of the Economy and Minister of Finance of Nigeria. Next to her, and I need to get my seating, we have Robert Sichinga, who is the Minister of Agriculture and Livestock of Zambia. Then I believe, Heather, can you help me out here? Have you the seating plan? Right, we have Saidou, who is the Minister of Agriculture of Niger. Then we have Ouro Agadazi, who is the Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries Minister from Togo. Then we have Achan Ogwaro, who is the Minister of Agriculture, Forestry of South Sudan. Then we have Maria Kiwanuka, who is the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development of Uganda. Then we have Alexander Chikwanda, who is the Minister, yes, that is correct, the Minister of Finance of Zambia. Next to him, we have a late addition to the panel. I don't have his name down here, but I have his card. Yeah, it's in flux, ladies and gentlemen. It is in flux. Sorry. Right, Mr. Futakamba from Tanzania, you're the Deputy Permanent Secretary for Agriculture or Finance?
Agriculture.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, we have, of course, Minister Adesina, who is the Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria. Now, we're going to start with our hosts, and it's fitting we start with our hosts, I think. And I'd like to turn to you, Minister Okonjo-Iweala, for the first question. And I'd like to really get your thoughts on this question of how the two of you, and it's a good thing we've got some space between the two of you in case the discussion gets a bit heated. But what that relationship is like, because while no doubt there's a lot of common ground, and it's easy to see why it makes sense for agriculture to be positioned at the heart of the economy, you have a lot of other priorities, and it's difficult to balance all of those. And in principle, it would be great to hear from you, like, what your experience has been of how challenging it is on a day-to-day basis to really start to turn these ideas into practice and balancing the many responsibilities that come with that, but also, whether it ever gets tense between the two of you and whether you ever sort of fundamentally disagree. And we'll hear from Minister Adesina afterwards to see if it's true or not. But on that note, over to you, Minister.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying that this is a relationship where we fundamentally agree on substance and on the direction that the economy should take and what should be the drivers. I think it's starting from there. First of all, when the president created the economic team, agriculture was front and center, the Minister of Agriculture as part of it. But what is very important for us is on substance. We know that we want to diversify the economy. We know we have a comparative advantage in agriculture. We know we used to be a nation in the 60s that was exporting, and that what we are using to import food now, you know, upwards of $10 billion, we could easily be import substituting and even exporting. So those are the facts. Once you've got the facts right, you've got the vision, which is that agriculture should drive the diversification of the economy. It becomes easier to have a meeting of minds. So that's point one. But I've been Minister of Finance before, and you know, it wasn't always easy to agree with agriculture. The reason it's easier with Akin is because we also had the vision that it's not all about doling out subsidies to farmers that never get there. And that was a great frustration to me as finance minister my first time. You know, you have these fertilizer subsidies. Every time in the budget, 25 billion would be going. So now he came and he cleaned up that whole fertilizer, you know, I don't want to call it a scam, but the farmers were not getting it. So we have a meeting of minds, but, you know, let me just say one thing. You know, of course there's tension, and the tension can come. Akin, you know, these agriculture ministers, you know, we have to watch them a little bit. You know, they just believe that you have to put in, you know, that farmers, you know, it's sort of like the health ministers also. There's a sense that whatever it takes to make sure the farmers get what they need. And if it's 4% money, so be it. And because we want to see our subsidies, you know, sort of identified within the budget so we can really track what we're putting in. 4% money is not sustainable. So we had that tension, you know, and Akin told me other countries are doing it, and I said, well, we are not other countries. And we can't afford it, but maybe we could afford 9%, you know, and so that's the kind of conversation. And in the end, we had a meeting of minds. Lastly, on tariffs. Tariff policy in order to support what he's doing. It took us 3 months. And he worked really, really hard on the issue of raising tariffs on wheat imports and giving incentives to cassava farmers. I think we saw the direction. But, you know, raising tariffs can also lead to distortionary behavior. So we spent a long time. There was quite a bit of tension. In the end, we agreed that this was a sensible thing to do. So those are the two areas. But, you know, I want to say that he's a wonderful partner.
On that note, Minister Adesina, a meeting of minds, perhaps not always a meeting of priorities. Are you happy with the relationship that you have with the Minister of Finance, or do you need more? Are there any frustrations in what you're trying to achieve, what you know you could achieve, but there are all these competing priorities?
Well, you know, thanks very much. When I was actually asked by His Excellency the President to come back to Nigeria to be a Minister of Agriculture, one of the things that I knew at the time was that Minister Ngozi-Iweala was also being asked to come back home as Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy. So, and she's a terrific leader, global leader, and someone that I've had great admiration for a very long time for the way in which she ran the World Bank. And so she was one of the actually main reasons why I actually decided to come back, because I knew that we could form a great alliance to reposition the economy. So when she was talking about meeting of minds, she's correct, because first and foremost is agriculture is not just about agriculture as a development activity. I don't see it that way. Agriculture is really all about the economy. If you think about it, you know, if you're earning money from crude oil exports and you're using most of that to import food, basically you're reducing your foreign exchange reserves. You are actually at the same time importing inflation into the domestic economy. You're exporting jobs, you're not creating jobs at home. And you're not earning more from foreign exchange that you can be earning. So I come to this from the same lenses as she has, which is we've got to take the agriculture all about the economy. So I don't talk to her about agriculture as a development stuff. I talk to her about what agriculture can do for the economy. And so we agreed that the $10 billion that we're spending importing food makes no sense. And that we have the resources, the land, we have the water, we have cheap labor, that we should be actually producing food, processing food, and creating jobs here. So from that particular point of departure, we agreed that we have to do import substitution. Of course, there were tensions because, I had to convince her that we needed to raise some tariff and also to raise levies. And eventually we agreed on how to do that. But having made that point, let me also say that the thing that makes our relationship quite easy is the fact that I am big on reforms, and she is known to be a big reformer as well. And so we decided and said, look, we cannot be a country that is known to be a corrupt country on fertilizer, having the worst fertilizer system, in Africa. So we took a big stab at that with the support of Mr. President. And we cleaned up a corruption of 40 years in exactly 90 days. And as Mr. President said this morning, the system we now run, which was before a murky system where nobody knew, money went in, you didn't know where it came out from. We've turned that into a very transparent system. The point is that builds confidence between us, which is she knows that I'm driving a very transparent and accountable system. And the last thing I want to say is that for the economy in particular, I am big on private sector. I don't believe that it's the role of government to produce anything. The role of government is good policies, good institutions, good infrastructure, enabling environment. But we've got to unlock the power of the private sector to grow agriculture for us as a business. And so since we actually have that same philosophy, it's easier for us to operate. But I'll say one last thing, is that I won't let her off the hook.
Good.
In terms of, she didn't know that I actually got her to organize this meeting. So the rest of you can beg her to give me more money.
Minister Okonjo-Iweala, is it working? Are you going to give him more money?
Well, he's getting quite a bit. He's getting quite a bit from different sources. But I do want to say one thing before the finance minister's here. We have a system here where, we used to have a system of budgeting where the finance ministry did so much of the work and decided, how much by themselves and which projects and so on. And, ministries just did not own it. Whenever they just say, well, they are the ones they decided over there. So when I came the first time as finance minister and I noticed this, we actually decided this has to change. And we changed into an envelope system, which is now being, of course, attacked. Nothing is ever. But the envelope system is you give the money to the ministries. They decide what their priorities are. And then there's more ownership. The reason I'm narrating this is because he's actually practicing that. When we did the guarantee scheme for farmers, when he came to me and said, look, we need input suppliers, we need you to work with the banks to guarantee risk. They're saying it's too risky to lend to these input suppliers. Will you do that? We set up this system. And, he had to put some of the money, some money had to be put down, to match this from the banks. And I said to him, to demonstrate that this is really, you have ownership of this scheme. We will do it for 30 billion naira, about $200 or so million. We'll take 70% of the risk. We've never done it, but he convinced me. But you have to put down, sort of the counterpart funding for this from your budget. Normally, ministers will say, no, you find some other money. He did. He did, and I really respect that. So I think those are some of the things that...
Before we move on, Minister Adesina, just one brief follow-up question. Are you happy with the rate of progress, or do you want to see more? And what really for you is the number one priority, very briefly?
Well, I am happy with the rate of progress, given where we were starting from. We were starting from a situation where, we were importing everything but air. And, here we are today, just 2 years after we started. We've been able to add 9.1 million metric tons of food to our domestic food supply, which is 85% above the target we set for ourselves in the first year. Here we are, we're reaching 1.5 million of our farmers that never got seed and fertilizers before. Some of them never even saw it, and now they're actually doing that. I'm excited because we have been able to attract private sector into this space that nobody used to want to do anything with. We've been able to attract $8 billion of private sector investment into this space because we've taken agriculture as a business. I'm excited because when Mr. President said we are going to become self-sufficient in rice, a number of cynics said, there's no way you guys can do that. But we believed that we could do that. And in just one season, we produced 1.1 million metric tons of rice, which is 1/3 of all the rice we need to be self-sufficient by 2015. So of course we are excited. But does that mean the job is done? Absolutely not. We think that what we really need to do, as Minister Ngozi said in the beginning, is get Nigeria to become a global player in agriculture. We're not satisfied with Nigeria just becoming self-sufficient in food. No, that's the lower end of a high bar. The high bar for us is to be a global player like Brazil. We've got land, we've got cheap labor, we've got a population. So we've got to really unlock this place. So that's really what our drive is. So I'm by no way saying that we're declaring victory, but I can tell you that the progress that we've made makes me convinced that, in fact, structurally we're changing the economy, and in the not too distant future, Nigeria will be very big in the global market for agriculture.
Thank you, Minister. It's interesting you mentioned Brazil, and that's one I'd like to come back to a bit later on. But we're going to head from West Africa to Southern Africa, and we're going to turn to our colleagues from Zambia. We're very fortunate in that we have Minister Chikwanda, who is currently Finance Minister, but has held both posts. He was, once upon a time, Agriculture Minister. When you hear this back and forth, here we have a relationship that seems to work. You've experienced both sides of the equation firsthand. Is that something that is helping you now as you sort of look at the issue of agriculture in Zambia from the position of Minister of Finance, vis-a-vis your peer who is the agriculture sector? Is that something that's important, being able to understand what the priorities are on the other side of the equation? How is that influencing the way Zambia is addressing the issue of agriculture?
First and foremost, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Minister Ngozi, to have invited us, the two of us from Zambia. And my colleague and I are grateful to the President, who was unable to come, but who also it fit to ask the two of us to come and be at this meeting. What goes on between the ministries of agriculture and finance in Nigeria is perhaps more slightly involved than what catches the ear. But let me say that it's very inspiring for, I'm sure, us from Zambia and maybe from the rest of Africa to hear the good progress that's going on. Nigeria is important for us in Africa. Because of its size, it has impact and it can exert a very positive demonstration effect. And in any case, Nigeria has been the greatest defender of African interests. Those of us from Southern Africa appreciate that, because during the days of the liberation movements, Nigeria came out strongly. They spared no effort to be the #1 defender of the African interest. And I think that whenever they weighed in, it made a difference. I was with President Kaunda in 1971 in Singapore for the Commonwealth Ministers of Finance meeting. Prime Minister Heath then dismissed what African leaders from Southern Eastern Africa said with very palpable contempt. But the things turned round when Dr. Ripo, representing Nigeria, said, well, Nigeria deserves the right to use everything at its disposal to defend African interests, and the British immediately changed the attack. So it's very important for us to hear that there is progress on the agriculture front in Nigeria. To add 9.1 million tons to the food production in a very short spell of time is a feat. It's an incredible feat. Now let me come to our situation. First and foremost, for all African countries, our prospects for development lie in the sphere of agriculture. Whether we have minerals, whether we have oil or not, agriculture is the thing that's going to deliver. And because of the demographic factors and the increase in the population of the world, agriculture is going to be at the core of global economic activity. It may not have been as significant in the past, but things have changed. Now with the expected increase in the world population picking up to something like 9 billion in what year, 2030 or 2050, agriculture is going to be at the center stage. So as far as I am concerned, I look at the agriculture as the number one engine of development.
How closely do you work with your fellow minister?
Very closely. First of all, we tend to have a very harmonious relationship in our country, and we have very close relationship. We work very much in harmony. But apart from that, from the practical point of view, the Minister of Agriculture, relationship by itself is like, I'm a dairy farmer, is the cow. I want to get milk from the cow. I have to provide a sort of agreeable environment for the cow to make sure that the nutrition factor is beyond scratch, so that hopefully I can get more milk yields and perhaps over a slightly extended lactation period. So I don't think that it would be prudent not to be sort of passionate about agriculture. That's where growth prospects lie. One, we want your national food security, and you want to raise the nutritional standards of your nation. You can only do it by agriculture. And then there is the question of jobs, creating jobs. You create more jobs at a cheaper rate than, for instance, take my country, than in mining. Mining is very expensive, and the gestation period is very long. It can take up to 20 years between the time you start prospecting, trying to establish the existence of mineral underground, and exploration, and before you come to mining. But the gestation in agriculture is much shorter.
Absolutely. But there's no doubting the importance of agriculture. But I'd love to turn to Minister Sichinga. How important is the relationship you have with the Ministry of Finance in Zambia in being able to make the decisions and implement the measures that the country needs, that the sector needs? Just how crucial is this relationship?
Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity. Well, let me say that just in response to your question, it is critical. It can't be any other way. But I think that maybe before I go to the details of that question, we really have to start from where our counterparts in Nigeria, the way they've worked. I think that the personalities, the relationships between individuals is also important. You cannot overlook that. It's extremely critical how the two ministers work together. But maybe just for the benefit of the audience, when Minister Chikwanda was first minister of Finance, I was going to do my ACCA in the United Kingdom in 1971. And so he has been a kind of a mentor, somebody you look up to, somebody you have respect for, because you know he's been there. You know, he's done it before. So, and also both of us have been in the private sector, and I think that understanding of the needs that you have to make it work, I think is important. And that's what I see here between our Nigerian counterparts. And I think this is also almost like a replica what we have in there. At the end of the day, it's a question of how well I put my case across. In my particular situation, I've only been in the ministry, this is my third month, but I've been Minister of Commerce before. But the relationship we've had with Honorable Chikwanda is one really of one looking up to an individual who has got such tremendous experience and can mentor you, can help the process. Nevertheless, when it comes to the issues of what I'm looking for my ministry, I have to know that I need to convince him beyond our personal relationship. I need to say to him, look, this is what I need, and this is what I need to have. And I know that when I make that point, he understands where I'm coming from, because he's been there before. But we also have a challenge. Making transitions and doing the reforms that our colleagues were sharing with us is not easy. It's a very difficult thing, because he has to migrate from where he is at the moment with outstanding commitments, and our government is going to be 2 years in September. So there are these challenges that you have to transform the economy, and both of you have to be singing from the same hymn sheet. You need to understand each other's position. I think the area where tension comes in is when I can't get the money on a timely basis. And I have difficulties because I know that he knows that, but his hands are also tied up because of certain rigidities within our economy. Nevertheless, I need to make the point. There are certain times I must meet, there are deadlines I must meet. I must order fertilizers by a particular time. I must liquidate the outstanding dates from the previous year. I must go to the banks and ensure that the commercial banks to ensure that they can be able to help us. And because I'm a certified accountant, it is much easier because I can see his side too. And then at the same time, I need to make sure that my own assignments are fulfilled because I've got targets. I have got to meet certain objectives. It's useful, extremely useful that he appreciates the fact that agriculture will be the driving force. And I totally agree with that because mining, for example, in our case, is a wasting asset. What happens when the mines have run out? And we've had this experience in the lifetime of our country. So he knows that we need to have this renewable resource. We've got plenty of water in our country. We have got 40% of the water in the Southern African subcontinent. We have also almost 1 million square kilometers of land, most of it arable. And that's a major resource. Young population, very much like Nigeria. 68% of our population are young people below the age of 25. 84% below the age of 35, which is the age of our youth. So clearly, this is something that we already have in our hands. And my judgment is that I need to use what I have in my hands right now to get us where we need to be, knowing, and for this purpose, knowing that the Minister of Finance is on my side, but knowing that he has got constraints as well.
Without the Minister of Finance on your side, is any of this possible? Is anything we've been discussing possible?
It would be much, much more tense. It would be much, much more difficult. It would be a much greater struggle. It would be, there's always conflict between ministries. I mean, you have to understand that. And especially when you're a Minister of Finance, you want to keep a balance between the various requirements. And because of that, it does create tension. There's no question about it. It's a question of how, because professionally I can convince the minister that this makes sense. And I know that when I talk to him, he will turn his ear and he will listen to what I'm saying. Nevertheless, the difficulty that we have is that of availability of resources in a timely manner so that we can all fulfill what we need to fulfill.
And are you happy with progress, or do you need to see more?
Very
briefly.
No, I wouldn't. If I said that, I would be lying. I want to run. I mean, because I'm younger, I suppose in many ways, I am more restless, in terms of wanting to get there. Whereas he is cogitating. He is, shall we say, more experienced, more mature in terms of having gone through it all. I am sort of kind of pushing and saying, we got to go. And
Who's winning the fight?
Well, I think it's very balanced. In fact, I don't see it as a fight. Since he needs milk from me, he's got to nurse me nicely and feed me and give me grass, But I think it's a very comfortable situation that probably many ministers are not in. And certainly we have got a very harmonious relationship, save for the fact that I need to get stuff on time. I've got to deliver. And I know that he knows that, but sometimes he doesn't deliver to me on a timely basis.
I feel compelled to allow a very quick response to that issue of the need for more urgency.
Yeah, well, generally, the issue of resources is a factor. But I think that the serious limitation is not so much the resources, the money not available. It's just a question of the bankability of ideas. The money will always be found if the Minister of Agriculture or any minister indeed can come with bankable schemes. When a Minister of Finance is persuaded beyond every conceivable doubt that the things for which the money is being raised are viable, there should be no difficulty to raise the money. Because if in these days, if you can't get the money from your internal resources, you can go to the market, the bond market, for instance, and raise the money. Last year when we went to the bond market, we were only looking for 500 million. And the money managers put 12 billion at our disposal. And we only picked up 750 million US dollars, because that's the things for which we had we didn't have schemes, bankable schemes beyond that. So if the Honorable Minister of Agriculture can come to me and say, I have the capacity to run these schemes, and if I'm convinced, persuaded beyond every doubt that the things for which he's looking for money are bankable projects, the money will be found.
Sure. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Heather, who has a question for the minister from Uganda.
Yeah, just talking of water reminded me of an interesting point that came up over our lunchtime discussion. Minister Kiwanuka, you mentioned you're the Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and you mentioned that not only do you have to have a partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture in Uganda, but you have to work with many other ministries to create the right enabling environment. Uganda is a country that the Rockefeller Foundation has been supporting and invested in for many, many decades, and it's very dear to our heart. So tell us, how are you changing the environment there?
Thank you, and first of all, thank you to the government of Nigeria for hosting us and for the Rockefeller Foundation for all the work you've been doing in Uganda and the other African countries. And I hope you come to Uganda quickly so we can sort of sort things out. Because when I came into the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development 2 years ago from the private sector, I had to deal with government procedures and government ways of looking at things. So although one fight did not happen between the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Planning, since I was both, and I couldn't ask myself for money I knew I didn't have. Uganda is run by a consensus by the cabinet, and there are 27 cabinet ministers and more than a few assistant ministers. So I'd always get into a situation where they said, you've given only 3% of the budget to agriculture, and agriculture is the mainstay of the economy. So we need to give it more. And the Maputo Declaration said you need to give 10%. And I said, yes. And I think, was it the Abuja Declaration said I have to give education 15%. And the Accra Declaration said I have to give so much to health, etc., etc., etc. So I said, agriculture is being looked at as a charity in many ways in Uganda and other African countries. And that is something we had to change. Because you can't just say, give more money, when you don't see what is coming out of the money you spent before. So I said to myself, by the time we finish adding up the rural feeder roads and the rural electrification and the warehousing schemes for produce, you'll find that actually agriculture is getting about 12% of the budget. And agriculture must be seen as a business, which gave me a lot of resonance with Minister Achin long before we met this morning. Agriculture has to be seen as a business that is sustainable and that is inclusive. Because as the Minister for Zambia said, agriculture is where the youth are and the women are. But they need to see themselves as workers, not as marginalized communities. So first of all, Uganda has no subsidies in agriculture inputs as such. We've been giving them free of charge to the extent possible. But because they're free of charge, people did not feel a sense of ownership. And they could not feel they could complain if they found that the inputs were substandard, because after all, they hadn't been paid for. You didn't pay for it, so what's your problem? So we've now readjusted it to try to bring in more of the informal sector, because this is a problem in Uganda. A lot of agriculture is in the informal sector. So you can't really document them, you can't see how they're progressing. With the result that when we had 18 months ago, and there's a drought in Eastern Africa and the Horn of Africa, Uganda is a net food exporter. So there's a lot of demand for our food, but we didn't have enough. You see, because with us, it's not so much scarcity as wastage. With our potential, Akin was talking about Nigeria's potential. Uganda has the potential to be the food basket of the whole of Eastern Africa. We have 2 rainy seasons a year. We have 2 growing seasons a year. We're exporting cassava, maize, rice, bananas, dairy products, market vegetables, but they're not of a sufficient good enough quality. Standardization is a problem, so you're not getting real value for money. So what I've managed to get my cabinet to agree is that, okay, agriculture must be focused on. We have 5 staple crops, which are both food security
and export. So they had to get that past the people politically, that we're concentrating on these 10, actually 10, these 10, not because the others are not worthy, but because we need to see a return. We need to see some sustainability. And if we can do the value added, if we can put in the processing plants in the various areas, I was very interested in the discussion earlier about the cassava processing plant in Mozambique. And the minute I leave here, I'm going to call my colleague in Mozambique and ask him to find out about it for me, because I'd really like to talk to those people. To put value added on the crops before they go into export. So we don't want to use price controls in times of scarcity. We want to use productivity. So in short, we've got a very ambitious program to make sure we maximize efficiency of agriculture, to make sure we eliminate wastage, and that it's sustainable. And if that sounds like a business plan, yes, it is.
That's great. And can I want to point out to people, my hunch is it was Akin, put cassava bread onto the tables here.
I think you could serve it on the panel.
I'm just trying out that.
We can pass it around on the panel.
So we're not calling on anyone while they're chewing the bread.
We can eat it. Is that right?
It's quite good.
Sorry?
We can eat it. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Because I'm starving.
You'll be even more handsome if you eat it.
It's good. 20%,
It's quite good.
right?
Yeah, it's very good.
20%.
I can vouch for that.
So I want to follow up with a question to Minister Ogwaro from South Sudan. The minister from Uganda mentioned the gap between the reality and the potential. And you were mentioning earlier that you are the newest country, you're the newest kid on the block, and how the gap there is quite large. First of all, tell us about what is your relationship like with the Ministry of Finance? Are you getting the kind of partnership that we see here? And secondly, just anything else in terms of how you would like to crowd in more private sector investment to what you're trying to do as the government.
First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for inviting us and for having this conversation. Because for South Sudan, we have a big learning curve, and this is one of the learning curves we are attending now. I admire the relationship between the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. I admire the good relationship between the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. But maybe comparing South Sudan only 2 years tomorrow, 2 years old as a country tomorrow is our Independence Day. And a country that has been independent for a very long time is very difficult. Number one thing, in South Sudan, everything is a priority at the moment. Because South Sudan was never, ever given any opportunity to develop. We have a country that have no roads, even no roads to lead to the farmers. We have a country that has no drinking water. We have a country that has no health facilities. Even what we call a hospital, in many countries, they call a health center. So you can see that agriculture is a priority because it is the need of the country. But when it comes into reality, Minister of Finance do not have the meeting mind with the Minister of Agriculture. Because to him, he would want to see a road being built first, electricity extended, health facilities, education. So then he tells me the farmers should begin to make agriculture as a business by themselves. But this is very difficult. This is a community that came out of war, that just came in, and they've been living in a begging situation. They have been extending their hands all the time, whether it is for seeds, whether it is for tools like hoes. We are still cultivating with hoes. We haven't graduated to tractors, and very few use ox plows. So, and also knowing that agriculture is really seasonal, because we have, even when we have 2 patterns of rain, if we don't get the things we need, the money to purchase the things we need for the farmers in time, we are not talking about agriculture. The other challenge we have is, even if we tell farmers to produce and increase productivity, how will they take it to the market? Because if a farmer cannot market the excess, that farmer will not cultivate the following years. He will tell me, I will be wasting my energy. I better do something else. So it is very important to have a relationship with the Minister of Finance that, one, they should facilitate agriculture on time. Number two, they should also find a way to market for the farmers. Because even when Minister of Commerce is there, there should be funding to have the strategic grain reserve where the Minister of Finance can buy off from the farmers and reserve it for days that they can put it back into the market so that the market price doesn't change a lot. But this is very difficult because Minister of Finance will say, we do not have the money to spare. If we cannot have even the money to give you for the tools in time. So this is very difficult. Even when there is a political will, the president could preach. Our president is really for agriculture and say agriculture should be the engine. And we have oil, and our oil is a curse, by the way. I don't know the Nigerians' oil. The oil we have is a curse. Now we are saying when the flow now continues and Sudan does not interrupt it, we would like to have the revenue of the oil to fuel engine agriculture for development. Because our GDP was 98% on oil. So now we want to change that, and we want to see the GDP of agriculture increasing. But that will become difficult if we don't meet the other things. Having a Minister of Finance who has not been from private sector, I think is also very challenging, because he doesn't see the need for improving the private sector or for improving agriculture as a business. We have ministers of finance that have been changed, and some of them have been professors. They want to go by the book, but I think it is important to have also a minister who had experience. And this is what I see here for Nigeria and also for Niger, that they have ministers who had experienced the real world. So they come back and say, no, we need to feed the cow if we have to milk it.
Zambia.
But if you want to milk a dry cow, of course you will blister the teats, and next time there's no milk coming out. For my sister from Uganda.
One final point, please.
Yeah, for my sister from Uganda, I want to find a way to stop the Uganda produce coming into South Sudan, because we are the biggest importer of Uganda foods.
We got more coming.
And it doesn't encourage our agricultural economy to improve until we stop that one coming and we create a gap that will enhance the productivity, because the farmers will see the need for producing themselves. Now our young people are moving away from the rural areas because they say this is a dirty job and it is for the rural people, and we can buy food cheaply because it's coming from Uganda. My sister, don't be surprised when we create a situation not to import from Uganda.
I think we should discuss that.
We should have separated those two seats.
I think we should have.
I should sit in between the sisters.
Nisha is right here.
Minister Okonjo-Iweala, I'm conscious you have to leave us in about 10 minutes, but I want to turn back to you and maybe just get your thoughts on what you've heard of the experience of some of your peers across Africa, and how that might inform sort of what the priorities really need to be when it comes to policy making for a lot of African countries, where the focus really needs to be.
Well, yes, before that I was going to say that actually sister from South Sudan brought up a very interesting issue of, cross-border trade and integration. And I want to say this because this speaks to the issue. There is absolutely no doubt that this continent can not only feed itself, but can export. We've got the land resources, we've got the water, we've got what it takes. And yet, it is on this continent that we have these appeals for food. So in looking at what we need to do, I think we should look not only specific to countries, but we should also look beyond regionally and sub-regionally, and we need to look at the types of tariff and trade policy we need to put in place, not to maybe inhibit each other, although I understand what our sister is saying that if they keep having cheap Ugandan food, South Sudanese farmers will have no incentive. But we need to put our heads together to deal with that. South Sudan should be able to grow food. Uganda should be able to grow. We've got countries that are in the Sahel also who have challenges, as our brother from Niger said, and who at certain times may need this food. So how do we organize ourselves? What policies do we put in place so that those who have surplus food can be able to store it rather than have it waste, process it, and then be able to export it? Now we have Josette Sheeran here somewhere. I saw her somewhere in the audience. Right. Is she there? Yeah. Now Josette started a policy when she was in the World Food Program, whereby she would, instead of going and buying whenever there was famine, before it used to be that they would buy food from abroad and bring to us here in Africa. And she actually started a process of buying food in one country and exporting it to the next country within Africa. And we all eat similar food. So that's a great incentive to farmers to produce and then share next door. So in short, what are the policies we need to look at? First, we should all put our heads together and agree that no more on this continent are we going to have people feeding us and having farming and so on.
Well done. Excellent. That's the way to go.
Thank you. The face of hunger in the world should not be the face of an African child. So that's the first policy we need to agree on. The second is becoming very practical. We have CADEP, we have NEPAD, we have all these, and actually they're working much more. So how do we, within our borders, do what Malawi was able to do and do it sustainably, which is to grow enough food within a short time for ourselves and export? So I think we can do it with sensible policies, not to shut everybody out, but to encourage our own farmers to do that. You've got to do this value chain. I'm now totally convinced by what Akin has said. If we just look at production, we won't make it. We've got to sit in each country and say, from research to testing to production to processing and then to market. And that to market means market in our country and outside. And then where we grow similar products, who has the better comparative advantage to be able to produce more to export? And lastly, let's not do beggar your neighbor policies. Let us look at our tariff regimes. In ECOWAS, we have a common external tariff, and we're actually discussing and debating it. How does it help Nigeria, which is a large country within a region? What balance do we have to strike to help all of us within the region? And finally, how do we not inhibit trade by throwing barriers and checkpoints all the way along our routes? So these are some of the key. I'm not providing you answers, but I'm saying we do have the answers. We do know the challenges, and I believe that we can solve them.
Well, the answer is, and this is what I was about to say, when the minister says we, she means all of you. Because it's the decisions that the people on this panel and your peers across the continent make that will realize everything that you've just been discussing. You have to leave us in 5 minutes, which is very unfortunate. The good news is that you're joining the delegation to China, and hopefully you'll be coming back with a lot more money for Minister Adesina.
For that.
Over there. The cassava bread is delicious, by the way, in case anyone is wondering.
The cross-border, I think, is probably something that we need to talk about a little.
Absolutely, definitely.
Would I just intervene on that, if you don't mind? Thank you. Well, I think the issue of cross-border is an important one that we need to address. Let me say this, that for Zambia, we sit around with 8 neighbors around us. And Zambia paid a very high price for the liberation of Southern Africa. We paid a price because we had to forego our own economic development in order to liberate the rest of our neighbors. But you see, what we wanted was the freedom to be able to trade with them, the freedom to be able to do business with them. And over the last 3 years, Zambia has been producing huge quantities of grain, and we are a net exporter. In fact, we have benefited from the policy that the World Food Program has been put in place, where we have supplied to almost all our neighbors grain. We're the only ones in the region that have got spare grain. And obviously we must be doing something right. But having said that, if you put tariffs in the way, then the whole issue of regional cooperation is defeated. Because the whole essence of regional cooperation, and in our case, we belong to two economic blocks. One is the Southern African Development Community, and the other one is the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. We belong to both. And because of this, we've agreed on tariffs that are lowered so that we can be able to export to each other. Had we not had that arrangement, it means that our neighbors would be buying at a much higher price than they should. And that would obviously inhibit them from having food self-sufficiency. But I think each one of these countries also has the benefit of a comparative advantage in one area or the other. As I shared with you, because of the water resource, we can produce certain commodities, for example, sugar, that we're able to produce at a far much better rate and price than, say, South Africa does. They can produce sugar, but they do it under irrigation. During a dry weather. And that makes it very expensive. Whereas ours is right close to the big river, Kafue, and of course the yields are tremendous by comparison. So I think we need to keep our doors open, otherwise we defeat the very essence of these regional groupings and the benefits we can draw from there. Is it not better for us to buy from one another rather than importing chickens from Brazil, for example? So what we need to do is to develop the infrastructure that enables us to trade with one another. And for us, for example, in Zambia, we are doing these connections. Tanzania, we have had long-time connections through Tazara and the road network. Right now, we're connecting to Namibia as well as Botswana. I think these are the areas we need to work around. Each one of us will have something that they can sell to the other that the other may not have, even at that particular point in time. So I think this is important, Southern Sudan, as you look at this, is to say, this we can do, these others can do better than we can. And so I would like to encourage that we not be too selfish about that. And because otherwise it just defeats the essence Absolutely. Of what we're seeking to do.
Well, the issue of regional markets
Absolutely.
Is, of course, at the heart.
Absolutely critical. And so for us, we are looking at the regional market first. Even before we export to Europe or anywhere else, I would rather sell to the neighbors. It's easier, it's nearer, it's cheaper. The standards of, shall we say, sanitary and phytosanitary requirements are not as high, and some of it is just ridiculously high, such that the cost of producing and exporting becomes excessively expensive. The other point that Minister of Finance from Nigeria stated was we share the diets. We come from the same regions, and therefore we have similar foods. In some cases, we have even similar languages. So I think that is important for us not to lose sight of. Otherwise, we are going to be depending on importing from other countries when we could get it next door.
Thank you very much. Before moving on to the next speakers, I just want to get our colleagues from Niger, Togo, and Tanzania in on the discussion, and we'll definitely circle back to some of those points. But I believe the minister has to leave us now, very unfortunately, but it's for a good cause. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining the panel.
Well done. Travel well.
Bon voyage, Minister.
I'd like to turn to our colleague from Niger, Minister Saidou. Listening to your peers, hearing of the experience of Nigeria, the experience of Zambia, South Sudan, Uganda, what does the picture look like from your perspective, especially coming back to this issue of this key relationship that we need, that has to be functioning between the ministries of finance and the ministries of agriculture across Africa in order for us to do anything in a meaningful sense about what we know the potential is?
D'accord, merci. Comme donc mes prédécesseurs, je tiens à remercier le gouvernement du Nigeria ainsi que la fondation Rockefeller. Merci.
Ça marche.
C'est bon? Oui, merci. Donc, je disais que je joins ma parole à celle de ceux qui m'ont précédé pour donc remercier le gouvernement de la République fédérale du Nigeria ainsi que la fondation Rockefeller pour nous avoir invités et venir partager avec nos pairs et nos collaborateurs financiers et donc des problèmes du financement de l'agriculture dans nos pays.
I'd like to thank the government of Nigeria and the Rockefeller Foundation for inviting us here to this platform where we can share our views on problems affecting agricultural financing within the region.
Donc au Niger, nous avons un programme qu'on appelle le programme de la Renaissance. Ce programme-là, ce projet de société que son Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, au moment où il était candidat à la magistrature suprême pour les élections de 2011, a élaboré et soumis à la sanction populaire et qui a eu à avoir l'adhésion de l'écrasante majorité de la population nigérienne.
In Niger, we have a program, an economic recovery program in place for.
Could you just hold the mic a little bit closer, please?
In Niger, we have an economic recovery program for companies that was put in place by the president in 2011, submitted for popular approval so that there can be mass public participation.
Donc ce programme économique et social d'un coût de 6 000 milliards de francs CFA pour les 5 ans de la mandature du président a plusieurs composantes, dont la composante phare qui est l'initiative 3N, les Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens, qui concerne le secteur rural et qui représente 20% du montant global des financements.
The program, which is an economic and social one, has several components. The government has allocated the sum of 6 trillion francs CFA to the program, and about 20% of that amount is going to the rural populations, and the main thrust of the program is for Niger to feed Niger.
And is that having an impact? I'd love if you could speak a little bit about, in practical terms, how that's changing the agricultural landscape.
On va y arriver.
I'm getting to that.
Annuellement, nous avons une loi de finances, donc ce programme-là a été bien entendu décliné par année, donc année 1, année 2, année 3 jusqu'à année 5. Avec le montant des financements requis. Et chaque année, il y a une loi des finances qui est adoptée, proposée par le gouvernement et adoptée par l'Assemblée nationale, qui fixe l'enveloppe budgétaire allouée aux différents secteurs, dans le secteur rural.
The program is split into a 5-year period, and every year funding is approved by National Assembly for the program, and every year the program gets the allocation for the year.
Donc dès lors que la loi des finances annuelle est adoptée, maintenant on sait quels sont les montants qui sont alloués à l'initiative 3N pour rester dans le secteur rural. Les relations que nous avons avec le ministère des Finances à ce niveau, c'est d'abord, il faut que les crédits soient libérés pour commencer la mise en œuvre du programme annuel. Et à ce niveau, il peut y avoir des retards dans la libération des crédits. L'autre problème qu'on peut avoir, disons qu'on a même avec le ministère en charge des Finances, c'est les procédures de passation des marchés et qui sont extrêmement longues avec des délais très longs. Mais bon, ça c'est à l'échelle sous-régionale parce que ça concerne tous les pays de l'UEMOA. Et l'autre problème également, maintenant, c'est en situation d'urgence parce que on sait que le secteur rural travaille avec des campagnes, donc campagnes agricoles d'hivernage, campagnes des cultures irriguées en saison sèche. Il y a les intrants agricoles qu'il faut avoir au temps opportun donc pour les mettre à la disposition des producteurs. Et souvent, donc, nous avons ces difficultés-là parce que les procédures de passation de marché ne sont pas adaptées justement à ces genres de procédures, c'est-à-dire quand il y a une situation d'urgence, malheureusement nous avons deux fois des écueils, mais bon, nous sommes en train de trouver la voie qu'il faut, c'est anticiper longtemps à l'avance donc sur les procédures, sur les passations de marché, donc des différents intrants agricoles pour l'une ou l'autre campagne des cultures pluviales ou campagne des cultures irriguées.
With the law on annual funding approved, the amount for each year is determined for this program. And then with regard to the relationship between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture, there is collaboration in the area of implementation of reforms and policies. But the areas of challenge include delay in release of funds, public bid processes that are very lengthy at sub-regional level, because that affects other countries as well. So that since agriculture is seasonal, there is a problem meeting up with the necessary timeliness due to the elongated bid processes.
Donc les résultats obtenus au cours des 2 ans donc, de mise en œuvre de cette initiative 3N, les Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens, sont très satisfaisants parce que la mise en œuvre des dispositions de cette initiative ont fait que l'important déficit céréalier que nous avons enregistré après l'hivernage de l'année 2011 a pu être jugulé justement en mettant en œuvre les dispositions de l'initiative 3N, c'est-à-dire avoir un important programme de culture irriguée, un appui à la campagne pastorale, des activités génératrices de revenus relativement à la récupération des terres dégradées avec l'empoisonnement des mares, un certain nombre d'activités qui étaient rémunérées en cash et enfin la reconstitution du stock national de sécurité, des stocks céréaliers donc nationaux qui étaient à un niveau des plus bas. Donc au cours il y avait donc par rapport à ces céréales, il y a eu des distributions gratuites ciblées, des ventes de céréales à prix modéré. Et il y a eu également un programme de transfert non conditionnel d'argent, des cash transferts, donc, qui ont fait que au finish, donc en fin de campagne, en fin de programme, on l'a appelé programme d'urgence, donc qui a pris fin en fin septembre 2012, donc à l'entrée de la récolte de 2012-2013. Donc nous avons pu, in fine, combler donc, le déficit record de céréales que nous avons eu au cours donc, de l'année 2011, comme je l'ai dit.
With the outcome of 2 years of the program, Niger Feeding Niger, have been satisfactory. We've been able to deal with shortfalls in the stock of cereals. We have been able to reconstitute our national stock and deal with scarcity at national level. We had a program, an emergency program in September, where we were able to supply cereals to areas that had a shortfall. Then also, we've been implementing the measures for the initiatives for the Niger Feeding Niger program, and we've been able to actually build up our stock. And we also had a program where we distributed cereals to our populations. So it's been satisfactory.
Minister, thank you. In the interest of time, I would like to move on to the one final point, please.
Oui, pour ajouter, c'est que justement ce programme, la mise en œuvre de cette initiative nous a également permis, au cours de l'hivernage de 2012, de produire jusqu'à plus de 5 millions de tonnes de céréales, ce qui représentait une augmentation de 48% par rapport à l'année précédente qui était déficitaire, mais aussi une augmentation de 27% par rapport à la moyenne des 5 dernières années. Donc cela a fait également que le taux donc de croissance économique du Niger était passé de 7% en 2012 à 10,8% en 2013. Donc comme quoi, disons, le secteur rural est vraiment le moteur de l'économie nigérienne.
Thank you very much.
Implementation of the program in 2012 helped Niger produce over 10 million tons of cereals, which was an increase of over 25% above the average production for the last 5 years. There's also been an increase in the growth rate in Niger, and it gave the percentage.
Great, thank you. Minister Agadazi, I'd like to get your thoughts on the discussion so far and this key issue of getting the relationships right between the right ministries when it comes to agriculture, because a lot of the potential flows from that.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je voudrais encore une fois dire merci au gouvernement du Nigeria et à la fondation Rockefeller pour cette occasion offerte aux pays africains, parce que pour le Togo, c'est un cadre d'échange d'expérience par excellence. Je vais être bref en disant que l'expérience togolaise se situe à 5 niveaux, sur 5 niveaux. Le premier niveau, c'est la vision. Le deuxième niveau, c'est les réformes institutionnelles. Le troisième niveau, c'est le financement, les financements. Le quatrième, les actions. Le cinquième, les résultats. Donc, pour me reprendre, pour la vision, le Togo, comme beaucoup de pays de la sous-région, ont été échaudés par des cessantes crises alimentaires de 2005 jusqu'en 2008. C'est à l'issue de ces crises que le chef de l'État a eu la vision de donner un cachet spécial au secteur agricole pour faire en sorte que le Togo n'ait plus, à vivre des crises que nous venons de citer, à inverser la tendance économique, la balance commerciale, qui fait que le Togo importe beaucoup plus qu'il n'en exporte. Donc, il y a une vision qui a été lancée et qui est soutenue par un programme au niveau du secteur agricole. C'est le programme national d'investissement agricole et de sécurité alimentaire.
And I'd like to thank the government of Nigeria and the Rockefeller Foundation for inviting us to participate in this platform. The situation in Togo, Togo, I will say, is going through a 5-phase experiment in agriculture. One, the first step is the vision. There is institutional reform, funding, action, and outcome. Due to the crisis we had from 2005 to 2008, the president of Togo made a decision to avoid such situations, and because of that, this vision was put in place. It's a vision for agricultural investment and development.
Vous avez voulu en savoir plus quant aux relations qui existent entre les départements. Le département de l'agriculture et des finances, c'est tout à fait normal. Et je peux vous dire qu'au niveau du Togo, nous sommes en parfaite symbiose. C'est le ministère de l'Agriculture et le ministère des Finances. Mais au niveau national, on a voulu aller un peu plus loin en reposant toute gestion sur la bonne gouvernance. La bonne gouvernance suppose qu'il doit avoir des réformes institutionnelles pour faire en sorte que chaque département dispose d'un cadre de travail qui puisse lui permettre de réagir sans pour autant se faire marcher dessus par tel ou tel département. Donc les réformes ont été apportées au niveau de tous les secteurs, ce qui fait que chacun doit répondre devant le gouvernement, devant le peuple. Et en cela, il y a une lettre de mission qui a été élaborée depuis le sommet de l'État jusqu'au niveau des ministres et qui se répercute même au niveau de la base, dans les fermes les plus reculées.
The relationship between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture is quite normal. We work in a symbiotic kind of partnership. And as with regard to the type of management that we are trying to put in place, it has to do with good governance. We are putting in place, or we have put in place a measure to enable response by each and everyone involved at government level, a response for the government and a response for the population.
Donc sur la base de ces réformes, il y a les bailleurs de fonds qui ont bien voulu accompagner le Togo depuis 2009 avec un apport financier conséquent pour permettre au Togo de mettre en œuvre le programme national d'investissement agricole et de sécurité alimentaire qui se repose sur 3 grandes composantes. Je dirais même que c'est des projets prioritaires. Le PASA, le PPAO et puis le PADAT. Il y a un projet qui s'occupe de la recherche, vous l'avez cité, c'est le fondement même de toute promotion agricole. Donc la recherche et ensuite l'appui accompagnement des petits producteurs parce que nous avons un territoire un peu effilé, la superficie n'est pas grande, mais il faut s'appuyer sur les avantages comparatifs pour soutenir la production et au-delà même soutenir l'économie nationale.
Donors have been working in partnership with us in Togo since 2009. They are basically funding the agricultural investment program. It is a program that is based on 3 axes. We try to provide monitoring for small-scale farmers and sensitize them on the uses of their production and all the other efforts they put in place.
One final point before I move on.
Le tout dernier point, donc par rapport à l'implémentation de ce programme, le Togo est passé du déficit récurrent que nous avons par le passé pour enregistrer des excédents sur une période de 4 ans. Mon collègue l'a précisé, ils ont connu une période un peu difficile en matière de fourniture de denrées alimentaires. Le Togo donc a appuyé les pays de la sous-région avec, bien entendu, un partenariat franc avec le programme alimentaire mondial. Donc il y a plus de 30 000 tonnes qui ont été exportées pour soutenir nos frères qui étaient en difficulté. Maintenant, cette année et pour les 2 ans qui vont venir, il est question d'agir sur le levier de la transformation pour créer de la valeur ajoutée. L'accent est porté sur le relèvement du niveau des producteurs avec bien entendu la prise en compte du genre. Les femmes représentent 53% de la population togolaise, donc l'accent a été mis sur les femmes pour qu'elles disposent des lopins de terre pour la culture et surtout la mise en marché. De même aussi pour les jeunes qui ont un taux élevé au niveau de la population. Donc tout récemment, on a avec le FIDA, la FAO et la Banque mondiale, il y a donc le projet national de promotion de l'entrepreneuriat rural qu'on va lancer dans les semaines à venir pour faire en sorte que chaque pôle de développement ne soit plus, les pôles de développement ne soient plus axés sur les centres urbains, mais les centres ruraux. C'est extrêmement important et nous y croyons au bon devenir de ce programme. Je dirais même une meilleure amélioration du niveau de vie des ruraux pour faire en sorte qu'on ait des petites entreprises d'ici 2 ou 3 ans. En cela, je voudrais dire merci à mon collègue du Nigeria qui a donné l'expérience de la distribution des engrais. On en fait au Togo, mais il y a encore des paliers à surmonter. Nous allons nous tourner vers notre collègue du Nigeria pour piquer un peu l'expérience nigériane qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, les paysans nigérians ne souffrent plus de la distribution. Du moins, La spéculation a été enrayée et nous voulons aussi copier cette expérience du Nigeria au Togo. Je le remercie.
Oui, donc... Sorry.
So with the implementation of the program, Togo has gone from a deficit of 4 years, from a period of deficit to 4 years of excess production. Togo was able to support other countries in difficulty with over 30,000 tons exported to help those countries. We're trying for the future to look at how we can add value. There's also the issue of women. We're trying to focus on women. Women account for 53% of our population. We're trying to enable them obtain land for farming and access to market for their programs. There is a program with IFDA to ensure that each development pole will be focused on rural regions. We're optimistic about the program and believe that it will help improve the quality of life of the rural populations. I'd like to thank Nigeria for the support it provided, and my colleague has a program of distribution in place. I'd really like to I'd like him to share that with me so that we can see how we can put it in place in my country.
Thank you very much. Engineer Futakamba. Last but by all means not least, having listened to all the other panelists and having heard the various experiences, from your thoughts, very briefly, in about 3 minutes or so, because I'd like to move on to some Q&A as well. And I know that both the ministers from Uganda and South Sudan have some thoughts on the previous discussion. Your thoughts on what you've heard so far, your thoughts on the issues we've been discussing.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe to start with, on behalf of my president and my minister, who were supposed to come here, we really bring a lot of apologies, but we thank the government of Nigeria and Rockefeller Foundation. Let me straight go to the key issues. The relationship of Minister of Agriculture. For us, when we say Minister of Agriculture, actually we don't mean the Minister of Agriculture, Food Security and Cooperatives, but we really mean Minister of Agriculture, Food Security and Cooperatives, local government and regional administration, and the Ministry of Finance, and also Ministry of Industries. So the relationship here for Tanzania is very smooth. Maybe to be informed that we are really pressing positively with regard to agriculture. What my government have done to smoothen this relationship, we have what we call President's Office Planning Commission. This is our think tank which coordinates all the ministries. So when it comes with issues on budgeting, priorities, all are submitted to the President's Office Planning Commission, and we are all taking heed to the priorities. So in the meantime, you can't say that the Minister of Finance have got an added advantage to any minister. We are all doing the submission there, and then the other normal duties for the Minister of Finance are going on there. So that's the advantage. But also the government have decided to strengthen that by bringing all the ministries to what we call big result now laboratories. We in agriculture, we have what we call agricultural lab, water, and others. And in those labs, we are all coming with the priorities which are being adhered by all ministries, and especially the Minister of Finance. And lastly, to mainstream that, in Tanzania we have decided that even during our parliamentary session, previously it was the Minister of Finance which was starting to present her budget. But now it's we, the ministries, we start with our budgets, and then the Minister of Finance is the last, along with the other financial bills and other things. So we can see, actually, we are very smooth in working with the Minister of Finance, and Tanzania, we are going on well with the agricultural sector development program, and agriculture in Tanzania, which is a priority, I can say we are moving rightly, and as my colleagues in Nigeria have said, we are also expecting in the near future, we are going to be an agricultural giant able to feed the other countries as what we are doing with our other colleagues. And lastly, let me say that we are really working very hard with the private sector, and especially with the smallholder farmers. We have a philosophy which we call hub and spoke. So we are working together with smallholders along with the nucleus farmers who are big investors. And we have gone so harmoniously and we don't see a big difference. And that's why now we have what we call the corridor approach. You are all aware we have a Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor of Tanzania where we are really working very hard. Now the private sector is coming into and we are developing catalytic fund and the patient fund, and now Tanzania is on the move. That's what I can say very briefly, managing time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to spend about 15 to 20 minutes or so taking some questions from the audience, but before we do that, I believe we have an unresolved dispute here between South Sudan and Uganda that we need to revisit.
If you can call it a
I do not want to leave it at that, to be honest. It should just come on.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming back to me. I don't think we have a dispute with my neighbor. I think I wanted to stimulate the discussion because it is very important to regionally to coordinate, collaborate, and work together. That is very important. Between South Sudan and Uganda, South Sudan and Kenya, actually we don't have a border. The border is artificially created on paper, but the informal trade is going on anyway. Even if any government will say we'll stop it, it will never stop because the informal trade is going on. However, I had wanted us to discuss on these policies of regional trade. How do we work together as different countries and trade with each other without taking disadvantage of one or the other? I think this we still need to have it clarified, especially for South Sudan, which is very new as a country. We have been trying to get into East African community, and it has been difficult because of some of the regulations, and also other regional trade, even the World Trade Organization. So there are policies that need to be polished in order for all the countries to benefit from it and to work together hand in hand. So what I was saying was to stimulate the discussion so that we see how can we move and have all the countries benefit and what are the policies that are there. Secondly, I would like really the countries who already are advanced to help the countries who are still dragging on in technology transfer. Because if you want to help the other country transfer the technology, we are now open-handedly inviting everybody to come and invest in South Sudan. We are much bigger than Uganda and even bigger than Kenya. And we are, I think we always pride ourselves as a country, we have all the potentials. But we also say, do we eat potentials? We don't eat potentials. We want technology to be transferred so that instead of us importing, let them come and invest in South Sudan and produce in South Sudan. So that we have the food ready at hand in South Sudan at a cheaper price. And then we also have job opportunity for the people of South Sudan, especially the youth. I'm very concerned about our youth moving away to the town and not wanting to dirty their hands. And also to help the women who are doing the labor. How do we help them improve? So this is one of the things I really wanted to clarify. So it is not about really burying it, but how can we move to help each other? Thank you.
Of course, thank you very much. Minister Adesina, did you want to jump in on this?
Yes, I just want to raise some issues. First is that, we can all be here and pat ourselves on the back and say we've done a great job, and I think everybody's trying. But the challenge is so immense. And I still feel that as a continent, the public sector is still underinvesting heavily in agriculture. If you look at the productivity growth of China's agriculture or Brazilian agriculture or the bigger countries, they spend a significantly higher share of their budget on agriculture. And there's no doubt at all that the rate of return to research in agriculture is very high. And so I think African governments still need to spend a lot more on agriculture. Agricultural research is what really gives you that potential. We can be here and talk all we want. We want to be giants of the world and so on. But if you're not investing in research, innovations to actually get you there, it's just a lot of hot air. So we really need to do that. Second is that I think this conversation has been fantastic. But I think the bigger conversation should be about the private sector, because all the money that we have in the public sector taken together is dwarfed by what the private sector has. So what we need to do smarter is really, as public sector, to figure out how to leverage the significant finance in the private sector. Take Africa, for example. 10 of the fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. Nigeria is the 4th fastest growing economy in the world. Africa may have a lot of poor people, but Africa is not a poor continent. And so we've got to really use our resources and leverage that significant growth capital that we have.
But would you agree that that always comes back to policies?
Well, it does. But I think at the end of the day, the lens with which we look at agriculture is what's important. If you look at it from the lens of public sector, you would never get agriculture to work. Now, I also want to say something about the issue of women, because I think my sister was alluding to it there. We talk a lot about women. In all of my career, we talk always women are the most in agriculture. So what? Then do something about it. You know, I mean, if you look at it, I think some of the innovations that I think the foundation can actually look at is first connecting women scientists to women farmers. Because the women scientists know the needs of women farmers better than the men scientists do. Second is we need to set up a fund in every single country. The women, you know, if a woman goes to a bank, the men don't, there are so many men trying to get money that they never get a chance at all. And I want to argue that we should put up a financing facility for women farmers, because we say they occupy 75% of the farming population, but there's no special facility to actually reach them. And so we need to do that. Third is that in the private sector, those that are buying produce of women farmers, I think the ministers of finance should structure incentives for those companies, fiscal incentives, that actually encourages them to buy the produce of the of smallholder farmers. Lastly is the whole issue of infrastructure. In everything we're talking about today, if you don't have good infrastructure, agriculture cannot work. And so whether it's road, whether it's power, whether it's irrigation, it's very crucial. Now, the question, however, is, we're talking about it just before coming to the panel, is do we invest in infrastructure everywhere? We can't. It's too expensive. And so we in Nigeria are working on what we call staple crop processing zones, which are actually large zones in which we attract the private sector to come and invest in areas of high food production. So they process, add value to everything there. And Minister Ngozi and myself are structuring fiscal incentives and infrastructure incentives to get that done. Now, if we don't do that, you'll find that most of what we produce is just going to rot away. Nigeria today is the largest producer of tomato actually in Africa, 1.5 million metric tons of tomato. But we import tomato juice. We are the second largest producer of citrus after China. And every juice that you drink here is all concentrate. The only local content is water that is from Nigeria. And so that's what we've got to change. Great. And that's why private sector is key. And we are very delighted that we've been able to articulate this to the private sector investors here. Dangote, for example, is putting in $45 million now to, for a plant that will process all the tomatoes that we have into tomato paste instead of importing that. Secondly, is also putting up a plant for pineapples. So I just want to end by just saying that this is a fantastic conversation, but let's not forget that we are still significantly underfunding agriculture. And I don't just mean give money to Minister of Agriculture. I'm just saying that if we are going to be the ones that will feed the world, we can't just do that by word of mouth. We've got to really, rev up support for agriculture, but leverage a lot more finance from the private sector.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Minister. It is obviously, it is the big question, isn't it? How do we get that private sector financing into a sector like agriculture? I would argue, once again, it comes down to policymakers like you. And I'm hoping what private sector representatives in the audience have heard has been reassuring on that front in terms of the viability of the sector in Africa when it comes to investment. Very briefly, to the Minister from Uganda, then I will take questions from the floor, I promise.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to add on to what Minister Kin has been saying about infrastructure. And that is exactly the view from our side of the continent, from Eastern Africa, especially Uganda. Because we said to ourselves, the government's resources are limited. So what can we do that the private sector can't do or won't do? And we said the bulky public goods of infrastructure, energy, water, irrigation water, and transport. Another area where the private sector is not keen because it has a long lead time and the benefits are diffuse to the users rather than the finances is research and development, as Minister King has said.
Absolutely.
And the third area is the workers. We're all talking about agro-processing, but many of our youth and our other workers are unskilled. Or they've been told to think of becoming lawyers or doctors or engineers, to work in the telecoms or the big banks. But how to get them back to the land, how to get them into the industries. Because one thing is sure, our land is limited and our populations are growing. So each unit of land, acre, has to develop more, has to give a bigger productivity. And Minister, I have my eye on your 60% arable land that you're not using. So that argument will continue. But so the government in Uganda said, okay, all our focus and all our oil revenues when they come on stream will go into infrastructure. And that is roads, power and distribution lines, and irrigation. We will do the research and development, the improved seeds, the certification, the extension work, and we'll skill the youth for technical, to work in the factories, the metal workers, electricians, plumbers. We all know a lot of lawyers and doctors. When was the last time anyone had a good plumber? Or a good electrician whom you could trust to wire up your house and not let it catch fire? So these are the areas where we're focusing on in Uganda. And
Minister, just very sorry to interrupt, but Minister Adesina has just informed me he has a plane to catch in under 60 minutes. So I think
regional integration. This time last week, the ministers of Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi, finance and infrastructure, we all sat down together and developed and signed off on a regional infrastructure plan, which we hope South Sudan and Congo, DRC, will be signing up to as well, again to address what Minister Kin is saying. So yes, we're aware, we have to leverage, we have to target our resources, but most of all, we have to show the private sector that we can be business-like as well. Then they'll come in.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Minister Adesina, who I believe has to leave us as well now. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay. To the audience, thank you for being so patient. It is, we have a lot of speakers, so there's a lot of ground to cover.
Can I just say that I want to thank the Rockefeller Foundation for a terrific meeting. Judy, thank you so very much. And just as I leave, they know me in Nigeria, I have to advertise cassava bread. The cassava bread is here, it's fantastic. Please make sure you have a taste of it and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to take one round of questions from the audience to the remaining panelists. And we'll start with Adam Green from This Is Africa down there. We'll take 3 or 4 questions. Apologies to anyone who doesn't get to ask a question. We are already over time, but I do want to get the audience involved a little bit. Brief questions, please, and very focused.
Hi. I had a question about tariffs, and for the ministers that are looking at using tariffs, it's partly about boosting domestic production, but also are the revenues being used for the agriculture development sector? What are your thoughts about the tariff revenues? And related to that, would you be worried if they became required part of the government budget, which would make it harder to reduce them later on once production was starting to rise?
Thank you very much. We'll take one from the middle and one from the left so that we keep it egalitarian. Anybody in the middle? No? Okay, gentleman in the red tie here, and then I'll go to the lady in green there. Gentleman in the red tie here. Brief question, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Joseph Macharia, one of the award winner in innovations from Rockefeller Foundation. And my objective was to talk about the youth. I've been able to establish that youth are interested in agriculture.
Very brief, please.
And within 5 months, I've been able to have 14,000 followers of young people. But one thing I would like to maybe quickly to talk about is we are talking about subsidies in fertilizers and seeds, but what we have realized is that youth are interested in innovative agriculture. When I look aloud, all those questions that come is about greenhouse farming, aquaponics.
One last chance to ask a question.
Yeah, have the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock identified the sectors that are attractive to the youth so that they can be able to work with them?
Okay, thank you very much. And the lady in the green top right there. And that's unfortunately all the time we have for questions because we are running over. And I apologize to people who don't get a chance. Corner the ministers afterwards is my advice.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Falain Karamalate. I'm with Lagos Business School. I'm currently here as an associate with the AMIP associate with the Tony Lumulu Foundation, seconded to the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. Okay, all the reforms of supporting farmers seem to be directed towards the small and perhaps the medium-scaled farmers. For instance, the supply of fertilizers and seeds, it's too small for the large
No
scale.
speeches, just go straight to the
Okay,
question.
right. So my question is, what are the plans put in place to support the large-scale farmers?
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 3 questions, one on tariffs, one on particular areas that the youth are interested in and whether that's something that you've been able to pick up. And finally, what is there by way of support for large-scale farmers? Now, not everyone has to answer, but perhaps very briefly, anyone on the panel who would like to respond to any one or all of those issues. We'll start with the Minister from Uganda and then the Minister from Zambia.
Yes, so as far as the youth are concerned, what areas are they interested in? We found out in Uganda, in order to make them see agriculture as something worthwhile, we let them see it's a business. Agriculture pays. So they're getting interested in market fruits and vegetables, tomatoes, onions, anything that has a growing period of 3 to 6 months, where they can quickly harvest and take their produce to the nearest market and get their money back. So that's what we're encouraging the youth to go into, not into the 2 or 3 year coffee and cotton and things like that, but market fruit and vegetables. Fish farming, that's another area they're looking at.
Thank you very much. Minister Sichinga?
Yes.
I didn't understand the question on tariffs,
Sorry,
so
okay,
I won't respond.
But if you'd like to comment on it briefly, please do, or I'll pass on to the Minister from Zambia. No?
Well, I think that with regard to tariffs, for most of our countries, because of the regional agreements, and I think it's probably, let me go back a little bit, I'll just wind back. It's important to understand that most of the governments will run their policies on the basis of a national development plan. Normally, they are 5-year development plans. And also they've got a vision, usually Vision 2020, Vision 2025, Vision 2030. Now, these obviously inform the framework, the framework within which, the fiscal framework within which each government is going to operate. But then, under it also are the regional agreements, where you've agreed on removing tariffs. In your particular case for SADC, we've agreed that we'll reduce this to 5%. So you are obliged to maintain that for the regional market. Others, yes, there is some tariff normally for commodities that you are self-sufficient in, and therefore you don't necessarily require. The way I see it working now is that most of the countries have already lost the revenue from tariffs regarding the agricultural produce anyway. So that's really not a major issue. And what most of governments are doing is to look at value addition, to develop those commodities that where they've got comparative advantage, and they also want to push them to the next stage, exactly the case we have here of bread and everything else that we're talking about. So I think that is important for us to appreciate that there's a framework around which we're having to operate. The last item is, I think, on the youth, just to say that most of the young people are in a hurry. They don't see the longer term. And so like Uganda, we tend to look at them in terms of the involvement in trade and interest. But I think there's another side, and I think that we all agree on this side, that this is time for reform, this is time for consolidation, this is time to look at how we do best the issues of research, the issues of ensuring that you provide self-sufficiency, and ensure that you can be able to move on to the next stage. I think most of our countries, from what we've discussed here, this is the stage at which we are. And lastly, I think just to say that it's difficult for a Ministry of Agriculture to have schemes that are specific to agriculture. For youth, for women, this tends to be a national platform on which we are performing. So one of the things that we're doing is that there are crops that in Africa are regarded traditionally as a woman's crop, for example. Sweet potatoes and beans. The men must do the bigger things. And here again, it's an issue of targeting. And I think we have failed in many respects to target this properly. So like Nigeria, we, for example, in Zambia, are moving towards an e-voucher or e-card, where we've got an electronic card on which there is credit to subsidize a particular farmer. And we want to target this to women specifically so that somebody else doesn't go and get their fertilizers and support we have. And for Zambia, we are supporting, we're spending probably close to 5% of our budget on subsidies at two levels. One is production level, where we provide the inputs in the fertilizers as well as seed. And then the other one is at consumption level, which in fact we're just in the process of removing right now. We have declared that the subsidy on consumption, which goes to the millers, we've removed that so that we can support more at the production level. This is how, that's why I said that most of us are doing consolidation. We're looking at reforming where we're doing and having, if you want, smart subsidies.
Smart subsidies, indeed. Engineer Futakamba, very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I just thought that for the issue of the youth, in my ministry, what we have discovered is that most of the youth, they want technologies. And as we are mentioning this morning about innovations. Now my government, what we have done, we are getting the graduates, and then we are supporting them with farming equipments or implements, and then we are supporting them with irrigation facilities so that they can go with a pressurized system and so forth. So with those technologies, you'll find that most of the youth won't face that drudgery because they think if you go to agriculture, it's very laborious. But with these new innovations and technologies, we are finding now more youth coming. And of late now in my country, we have 11 graduates who have been given about 400 hectares, and now they are involved with irrigation for production of high-value crops. So I think it's the essence of technologies and the innovations.
Thank you very much. Mr. Agadazi, 1 or 2 minutes, very briefly, please.
Il y a une consoeur qui a posé la question sur les gros producteurs. La différence se situe au niveau des expériences entre gros producteurs et petits producteurs. Pour les gros producteurs, c'est ceux qui ont déjà des expériences éprouvées en matière de production, en matière de transformation, en matière même de mise en marché. Et souvent, c'est des producteurs qui ont accès facile au crédit, que ce soit au niveau des banques classiques ou au niveau des institutions de microfinance. À l'inverse, les petits producteurs, c'est ceux qui ont des revenus très bas, qui difficilement s'en sortent. Et au niveau du Togo, on a fait en sorte à identifier ces petits producteurs-là sur l'ensemble du territoire avec un projet qui les accompagne depuis la production jusqu'à la mise en marché. Donc, on a conçu des zones d'aménagement agricole planifiées. Donc, on regroupe une centaine de petits producteurs autour d'une exploitation qui peut aller jusqu'à 100 hectares. Et on met à leur disposition des machines agricoles, les tracteurs, l'appui technique gratuit, c'est les agents de l'État. Au niveau aussi de la mise en marché, on les accompagne pour placer les produits à l'intérieur du pays, de telle sorte qu'au bout de 2, 3 ans ou 5 ans ou plus, qu'ils puissent avoir accès facile au système de crédit, que ce soit au niveau des IMF ou bien des banques classiques. Généralement, ce volant de personnel, c'est les femmes, parce qu'elles sont faibles, c'est aussi les jeunes qui sont sans emploi. Voilà ce que je voulais juste dire.
It will come on. Just.
The issue of large-scale farmers, I think that the difference between large-scale farmers and small-scale farmers. The difference between large-scale farmers and small-scale farmers is really one of experience. The large-scale farmers have more experience in market access, in funding, and other areas, and usually they have established financing So they're not struggling for financing like small-scale farmers. In my country, we have a program for small-scale farmers to provide financial assistance and monitoring. We've also put in place land schemes for them where we provide land and then we kind of monitor them in their work. And we know that over a number of years, they'll be able to achieve a higher status, as in maybe become even large-scale farmers.
We are unfortunately going to have to wrap up because I see a lot of people checking their watches already. I know we have to head to dinner, but to just bring the session to a close and by way of summary, obviously this isn't an issue that's going to be solved today. And the point of this session was not to provide the solutions here and now, but to maybe stimulate some thinking and once again reinforce the point that whether it's the private sector, whether it's innovation, whether it's science, whether it's the youth and so on and so forth, all of that comes down to one thing: good policies versus bad policies. It's that simple. It is that simple. And it's very rare that we have such a cross-section of people who are going to be responsible for those decisions on stage together. And once again, I want to reinforce the point that the decisions that the individuals on this stage make in the next 5 to 10 years are going to determine a lot of what we've been discussing today. So I hope you all keep a close eye on them because I will be watching them very closely to make sure that they get it right.
You will?
And to bring it to a close, what I would say is, I'd like us to cast our minds back to this morning to reinforce the fundamental importance of agriculture to the African growth story. And what struck me in the session we had this morning with you, Heather, and the two ladies, was their response to the question of what have you done with the extra money that you've gotten from this program. And what I heard was, I'm sending kids to school, we're feeding ourselves, we're reinvesting, and we're growing the business, and we feel empowered. Now, when I hear we're feeding our kids, we're talking food security, we're talking health. We say we're sending kids to school, we're talking education. When we say we're reinvesting that money, we're talking growth, investment, and development. So when we say agriculture, what we really mean is development. It's that simple. It is that simple. And that, if nothing else, that really, I think, ought to be the message that's taken from convening like this. And finally, please join me in thanking the Rockefeller Foundation for the convening, for putting together this very unusual and unique panel. And thank you so much for all the panelists and the audience, of course. Thank you very much.
As the ministers depart the stage, I want to thank them once again for a remarkable panel, and to our two moderators as well. Thank you very much. And before you go, we have a couple of announcements about the evening and tomorrow, and then some concluding thoughts. I know it's a long day, but these are important announcements about food, and it's the food that we are going to consume and enjoy tonight. So first off, we have a reception here in this building. That's at 6:15 this evening. So the reception is here at 6:15. And then dinner is at 7. And we have a delightful dinner for you. There may be dancing. I'm not going to say that for certain. Please remember to bring your tags with you because you will need them to get back into this building. So if you would do that. And then tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp, we have a deeper discussion of some of the issues that were discussed today, and we'll come out with some real solutions for marching forward to realize the potential of African agriculture. So to conclude, I'd like to call on my colleague, Mamadou Bite, who is the Managing Director of our Africa Regional Office based in Nairobi, for some concluding thoughts on today's session. Thank you.
Honorable ministers, dear partners, distinguished guests, I would like to thank you all, to thank all of you for taking the time to join us here today. In particular, we owe special gratitude to His Excellency President Goodluck Jonathan and our valued trustee, Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and Minister Akinwumi Adesina. We are privileged to have representatives from more than 20 African countries and beyond, including esteemed Prime Minister of Togo, Ministers of Agriculture and Finance, and permanent secretaries. We are also delighted to have been joined by key persons in business, philanthropy, academia, development, and the NGO sector, and some of our grantees. This includes Oxfam America, which deserves our great thanks for a job well done in the research and scanning process that yielded the 8 catalytic innovations you've read about, and that, of course, represent just a snapshot of the incredible innovation we see wherever we look at. There are literally hundreds of these kinds of solutions just waiting for financing, policy frameworks, and other interventions to unleash their potential and benefit millions of Africans. It is no coincidence that we've filled this room with the top leaders and stakeholders in agriculture and finance. You represent the two sides of this coin. Finance ministers and stakeholders who have the means to implement innovative financing models to boost agriculture production and inputs such as soil, seeds, fertilizer, and water, and those on the agriculture side that are focused on the output, the processing, distribution, and access to markets. Both are absolutely critical to realizing the potential of African agriculture, and one cannot succeed without the other. In order to replicate and scale these innovations to reach more people in more places, to truly transform the sector and maximize its impacts on not just productivity, but profitability, we must find ways of working together and break down not only the barriers to market, but the barriers to collaboration. This morning, we heard President Goodluck Jonathan say, we cannot eat the potential of agriculture. What we need is to unlock it. We can only unlock it if we break down that barrier to collaboration. If we work, as we have heard during the panel that just finished, the need of collaboration within government, between government and other stakeholders, including civil society, private sector, etc., but also across countries. That is very important to break down that. So today, food and prosperity are still intrinsically linked. Farm production provides the life-sustaining calories and nutrients that allow poor communities and indeed all people to sustain health, secure livelihoods. With increased agricultural yields, crop sales generate cash to allow families, communities, and nations to invest in infrastructure, education, and vital services. As a continent, we will need initiatives that encompass a systemic view of the relationship between food security, resilience, and development. The Rockefeller Foundation continues this focus on the need to transform human systems to create food security in the hopes of nourishing the human potential in the world's most challenging regions, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Building resilience and promoting innovation are at the heart of our vision as we solve today's most pressing problems. It is my hope that all of us have been challenged and inspired by the wealth of knowledge and expertise that we have seen and that have been displayed and discussed here today. We have seen catalytic innovations in agriculture value chain and the potential they have to grow African economies, and especially the benefits to smallholder farmers through, as we have heard, one-way transformation of African agriculture from a subsistence one to a more attractive, viable, and commercial one. We appreciate your participation, and we are excited that the knowledge you have shared will deepen tomorrow's discussion on how to take forward observations from today. Our centennial is truly a remarkable milestone. Here in Africa, it has given us not only an opportunity for celebration, but also a chance to look ahead at possible challenges in these sectors and discuss new ideas for addressing them. We as a foundation have learned immensely from all of you, lessons that we will take with us to inform our future programming and grant making. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Cocktails will begin in the foyer outside this room at 6:15. Have a pleasant break.